All right, we're gonna jump right into this. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. So deeper than water, right? So for those of you who still don't understand, why do we keep talking about water? What does this really mean? In the middle of the pandemic, I know March 13th, like I know my birthday, right? Because that is the day that APS said, hey, you all can't come back in this building the way we know it. And what we saw subsequently was about 600 reported on average, 600 mostly Black male youth go to the corner selling water at various intersections. And at first, no one knew what to do. I don't know if we still do. And so what we did know is that something had to be done. What I am most proud about as I learned to celebrate the wins is that Coach Boyd, who's co-founder of a nonprofit that I helped to lead and run, said one day, you know, do you see these young men at this corner? And I'm like, yeah, I've noticed them too. Past them as I go to the grocery store. At that time, I was venturing out just once a week to go to Kroger. And then another day he said, well, let's grab some pizza and go see what it's about. And so he did that with some other men and came back and said, okay, there may be something here. So we grabbed some trash bags, some masks, and we went back out there and we began to build relationship with these young men. It's Deeper Than Water came about because when we literally had to pay them to come off of the corner because we couldn't really get any direct answers from them because we were standing between them and their money, them and their livelihood at that corner, you know. And I think at that time we were paying them $100 a day and buying out their inventory just to get their attention. What we realized very quickly is that we were really dealing with the latent effects of poverty. Not just the fact that water was a low-hanging fruit or that everybody decided to pick up a water bottle and some coolers. They were really out there because they were impacted greatly by poverty. And so that's what I mean by it being deeper than water. Water was the vehicle, as water usually is, to carry us someplace. Water is going to constantly move. When water stays still, it becomes stagnant. It begins to smell. It begins to attract mosquitoes, right? It becomes unhealthy for you. But moving water is water that you can digest. Moving water is water that you, as Aaron, you know, subtly places, hey, hydrate. Moving water is what we want. And so I want to make sure that we just have that context. So in that, and going back to the part of March 13th and not being able to return back to schools, just across the state, it wasn't just APS, right? It was all schools. We were in a pandemic. We were quarantining, and we learned very quickly that everybody could not quarantine. Quarantine was not an option for everyone. So let's just start right from the beginning. Outside of the pandemic, because what we know is that now that school has opened, a lot of students have not returned back to the classroom. So I'm going to kick this question off to you first, Aaron. Why do we see, or why do you think we see an increase in truancy, specifically around Black male youth? And how do you think that may or may not correlate to some of the rising youth on youth violence that we're currently seeing?
That's a really good question. So I'll answer this question from a perspective of a former educator at a alternative school here in Metro Atlanta. What I found was that one of the reasons that young people may not come to school is because they are surviving outside of school. What that means is some young people are experiencing what KaCey mentioned earlier, latent aspects of poverty. So if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it talks about in order for us to reach self-actualization, there are certain things that we need in order for us to just be okay. And many of our young people aren't getting those basic needs met. So if I am forced to make a decision to eat, pay for somewhere to sleep, pay for clothes, not only for myself, but maybe my little sister or little brother, or go to school, I'm going to do what needs to be done for me to ensure the safety and health of my family. While school should be a safe place for me to get food and not be judged and find the care that I need in order to survive and ascend to my highest potential, sometimes during a survival state, young people don't see that. I'll leave you with this. One of the things that I absolutely employed as an educator was the idea of relevant instruction. Adolescents are really big on relevancy. Why would I go to class to learn about Shakespeare? Mind you, I was an English teacher, so for me to talk about Shakespeare is blasphemy, right? But why would I go to school to learn about Shakespeare when I can go up the street and make $200 in an hour, and that $200 can feed my whole family for the week?
I want to pause right there because I think that's a perfect segue from a story that I've heard you've mentioned before, Courtney, when you kind of got your wake up call when you were teaching. Do you mind sharing a little bit of that? Because I think it makes sense, and I think it helps for people to understand that these aren't one-offs, these aren't silos when we speak of these engagements that we have with young people, when we speak of these experiences. To my knowledge, I don't think you all have met or had a conversation. So for him to say that, will you share the experience you had in your classroom?
Absolutely. I mean, it is, first, thank you so much for having me. The long and short of it is I was a middle school teacher, taught all boys on Bankhead at Best Academy. And one day thought I was doing a pretty good job at teaching a lesson. I think it was on the Inca and Aztec or something like that. And, to your exact point, I look out to the classroom and the kid is going stark raving crazy, right? Like he doing what he do. You know what I mean? He throwing stuff, like he just messing with the other kids. And I think I'm doing a pretty good job at teaching, this really, really interesting and necessary lesson that the good folks told me I had to teach. And, sooner or later, I just pulled him aside. I was like, bro, you're going to have to, like, what's up, man? You're going to have to holler at me or whatever. And so long and short of it, man, his name was Deshaun. And he looked at me in my eyes outside the classroom and just said, look, man, the stuff you teaching isn't going to help me feed my sister tonight. It was irrelevant. And that's the short version of the story. But in that moment, so much truth kind of washed over me. And this is a kid who was 12 years old and was effectively the head of his household. And for a whole bunch of reasons. And so, same, I'm the choir, I can't say it any better than you've already said it, but kids are coming to school facing some impossible circumstances. And oftentimes what happens inside the schoolhouse is really irrelevant. 1 + 1 is irrelevant if I can't put food in my stomach. The Inca and Aztec is irrelevant if I don't know where I'm gonna sleep tonight. All of the stuff that happens inside of school has, most of that stuff candidly has zero connection to what our kids are facing outside of the school and some of the circumstances they are facing. And so we've got to find a way to bridge that gap.
And I think that's important because I guess it's 2 weeks ago now. Me and my family were on the front porch, right? And beautiful day. Elders were dressed in their African garb, headed to go see Alvin Ailey, right? The Saturday matinee. And we see a horse-drawn carriage going down the street. And it's carrying the body of Lloyd, a Washington high school student who was shot. If anybody's familiar, Lloyd is actually Lloyd Jr., the son of Yellow Boy. If you are into hip hop and rap and aware of his contributions to the music industry, it was his son who was shot and killed. And my heart sank for a moment because what I saw behind his horse-drawn carriage was about 100 kids literally in the streets, almost like it was a parade, right? And they were carrying signs and they were calling his name and they were finding a way to celebrate their friend. But all I saw was, gosh, as much as I don't want to think this, who's going to be next? And, I tease people all the time because I sit on my porch and my name gets called. And sure enough, some young man's walking down the street and all he starts yelling is, Miss KaCey, Coach Boyd, right? And I'm like, we know these children, but they're following a horse-drawn carriage. And so if what we're teaching them in school is irrelevant, right? And not wholly, but for what a lot of them are experiencing. And they're not going to school because they either don't feel safe or don't feel like what they're getting is necessary to their existence right now. They're finding themselves on the streets. And when you are 14, 15, 16, and your frontal lobe is not completely developed, right? You're still learning how to make proper decisions in very real circumstances. We're starting to see that there is more youth on youth violent acts happening, largely because they're spending more time by themselves, with themselves, without someone with a little bit of wisdom or experience helping to shape that frontal lobe. So with that, how do we feel, or what do we think could be done in terms of traditional education, or if it's something that the community needs to work harder at? But how do we focus or shift their attention to something that is going to help them versus continuing to give them the same things that aren't impacting their lives? And for as much as we're trying, it doesn't seem like we're moving the needle. It doesn't seem like we're doing much, because while that was 2 weeks ago, we know that those acts have happened since then. Someone else has lost their life since then. And so that, and dual question, and either one of you all can jump in. Gang activity is on the rise, right? Now, when I was growing up, you had the Bloods, the Crips, Latin Kings, maybe, right? I don't have enough fingers and toes to count the number of gangs, right, in this city and across the country. So many, in fact, that you speak of alternative schools, these children cannot go to school unless they have on white shoes, white, black, or gray khakis, because every single color in the rainbow is associated with a gang. That belongs to all of us. So what do we do? How do we shift their focus to something that's going to be good, because they're falling to traps that they're setting for themselves in a sense?
So I think a few things. One, we do a lot of talking at people generally. We do a lot of talking at each other, but we definitely do a lot of talking at kids. And I think we need to first and foremost ask them, right? I think y'all know what y'all are dealing with every single day. Y'all know the issues that you're facing, whether it's inside the classroom, at home, in the street, so on and so forth. And I don't think we've done a good enough job of trying to unpack that and really listen to our young people. And so one of the things that we're trying to work on the city side is really build out what's essentially will be like a platform, a youth-based platform for them to tell their own stories. So imagine us giving youth a podcast studio, a TV station, a camera, and everything they need, and just tell what's happening, right? And so that's important because I think a lot of the times the solutions that we develop work in our mind logically, right? They might be, following somebody's curriculum, pedagogy, so on and so forth, but we haven't done anything to actually say what what is really going on in your life, right? Like we can come up with this cool program, and all bruh might have needed was a hug. You know what I'm saying? Like, bro, just needed you to show up and some food real quick, and you showing up with, these 9 different things. And so, like, I do think we got to do a better job of listening. The second thing I would say, as it relates to the gang problem, is we got to build different gangs. We got to build, it's, if you think about gang culture, right? There's a recruitment process. There's kind of there's an interest stage. There's a recruitment process. It means something. It means something to be a part of something. And I think when we lack those opportunities, right? Like the basketball team is a good gang. Midnight basketball is a great gang to be a part of, right? Like when I was growing up, I was playing baseball, I was in karate, I was doing so many other things that like I had that level of connection between folks who look like me. And so when I said we got to build better gangs, we have to build better gangs that are targeted towards the things that our young people have told us matter to them, that they actually want to do. Because that's essentially what's happening, right? And the folks who are turning our young people in the wrong direction are doing a way better job at recruitment. They're doing a way better job at making stuff meaningful, making stuff immediate, right? And we haven't done that. And so I think we've got to do a better job and build better gangs.
That was good. I agree with a lot of what Brother Courtney said. There are a couple of things that I want to definitely highlight when we talk about violence in community, especially when we talk about young people. It is important that we have an equitable conversation. Courtney brought up the idea of the agency of young people and listening to them, listening to their voice. Oftentimes people act out because they are not seen or heard. I'll say that again. Oftentimes people in general act out because they are not seen or heard. You will see me one way or the other. And it is important for us to see and hear our young people, but it is also equally or even more important for us to tell the real story. And the real story doesn't feel good. The real story doesn't end up on the news. The real story doesn't sell. The real story isn't that 1 million Black kids are killing each other. I'm sorry. We can no longer villainize our young people. The data doesn't even support that. The data does not support that it's 1 million Black and brown kids who are killing themselves. But when you look on the news, you will be captivated by the idea that Black and brown kids are killing each other at an alarming rate. Now, as a Black and brown person, any rate is an alarming rate to me. But what we should be very clear about is telling the real story. Because when we say, oh man, there's so many y'all young people killing each other, it dehumanizes Black and brown kids. And when you dehumanize Black and brown kids, it's easier to mistreat them. It's easier for us to say, oh, well, I'm going to tell you what you need to do. Back in my day, you need to pull your pants up and you need to do this and you need to do that. It's easier for us not to listen to somebody who's not human. So I challenge everyone who is here or who's listening to my voice, start researching the data of violence in Atlanta. Demographic violence, it's out there. Now, as someone who works in violence intervention, I do suffer from trauma, right? Secondhand trauma. So it's harder for me not to see the children getting killed because I'm around them. But I also know that that is just a minute subset of real data. Because when we change the conversation, we can start having bigger, greater, more impactful, more empowering conversations with our young people. And they too will have more empowering conversations with each other.
That's good.
Yeah.
No, I like that.
And for the gang piece, let me put this out here.
Sure.
For the gang piece, you know what gang members are doing? They're listening and they're seeing. And again, we have to come from another perspective because joining gangs looks different than it looked 20 years, 30 years ago.
Definitely.
I'll leave it there.
And I think the other important part around gangs is that they take care of each other. In order for me to make sure you stay a member of this gang, every need you have is gonna get met. You need new shoes, I got you. You hungry? I'm gonna make sure you have lobster and crab legs and whatever it is you're looking for today. You want the latest drip? We got you. Or you need some money in your pocket? And what happens is because again, their frontal lobe is not completely developed. They think that this is going to continue, but then you got to pay a price someplace, right? And that's the part that I think a lot of our young people miss. But you brought up the humanity in something, right? And so I want to kind of shift us a little bit. We hear this context because a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, young folks who find themselves in gangs come from very economically depressed communities, like they're seeking something, back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And so, at least in the Christian faith, there's this phrase that we hear a lot that the poor will be with us always, right? When people don't want to do anything, right? It's like, well, I've got mine, you get yours. Poor people are always going to be around. And while that is true, there are some things that I think that we need to consider. Psalm 34:6 says, a poor man called and the Lord heard him. He saved him out of all of his troubles. And what we know is that, at least what I think, now I could be wrong, somebody check me, I don't think Jesus is going to physically walk the earth again. Now, he changed his mind if he wants to, but from what I know, I don't think that's going to happen, right? But he gave us instructions that as believers we're to do greater works than he did. And we often pray that we are to be the hands and feet of Christ here on the earth, right? We're supposed to meet the needs. But for that to be a truthful statement, it means that those of us who hear of those who are impoverished, that we then have to show up in some capacity. Psalm 82:3 tells us that we are to defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. And in my work, I see the fatherless often. And what we know is that we have to sometimes stand in the gap to help defend them when others want to blame them and not acknowledge their circumstances or offer support and help them experience a different outcome. Now, I mentioned the scripture of the poor will be with you always, or the poor will always have you is actually what the scripture reads. Matthew 26:11. Now, there's a difference between the poor will always be with you and the poor will always have you, right? And so most of us read that and we stop right there, but the remainder of the sentence says, but you will not always have me. And the essence of this is that there will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed toward your fellow man who are poor and needy in your land. So yes, poor we will always have, but then the command is that we are to be open-handed and we are to take care of those who are needy and who are poor, right? And I think not even just faith-based, but just as we have sociological conversations, political conversations, we stop at the part that proves our point. And then we absolve ourselves from the responsibility of why the conversation is being had in the first place. Which leads me to something that I've wondered for a while, and this may be the sticky question of the night. The sticky question of the night, right? And as much as I'm tired of this statistic, I'm going to say it, I'm going to read it, because until we fix it, somebody's going to have to sound the clarion call, okay? In Atlanta, if you are born in poverty, you have a 4% chance of getting out of poverty. We also know that Atlanta is either 1 or 2 in wealth inequality in this country. Here's the sticky question. We've had 50 years of Black leadership, from municipalities, the school board, county. police chiefs, fire chiefs, right? We also know that there are three major players in this city: the city, the school system, and the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. Now, with all those things there, my question is two parts. How do we get to a place where we have the widest wealth inequality with all those things I just mentioned? And two, why is poverty so prevalent in our city? Because I think there's two separate answers. And again, nobody on this stage and nobody currently in office is to blame. This is something that has developed over decades. It's how did we get there? And how do we get to the point where we've had all of these wonderful things? Atlanta's the black Mecca. Folks still moving here by the thousands every single day, right? I call it, excuse me, Katie, and whoever else is now melanated on the screen, right? I call it the land of magical Negroes. Okay, so it can be Wakanda to you. To me, people see Atlanta as the land of magical Negroes. You move to Atlanta and all your problems gonna be solved. You're gonna find your man, you're gonna find your wife, you're gonna be rich, right? You're gonna live the life. Then you get here and we got kids selling water in the street. We're the widest wealth inequality city in the entire country, and you got a 4% chance of getting out of poverty if you were born into it. Somebody help me make sense of it, because I can't figure it out.
Oh, I'm gonna let you have it for now, because I got a lot.
Yeah, no, I think it. So I want to go back and say that that 50-year number. Guess what, guys? We did not solve 400 years of problems in 50 years, right? And so, like, the issues that face Black people, starting in 1619, right? Like, and we're still dealing with the negative effects of slavery and Jim Crow, and the Black codes and redlining and everything. Like, our communities were intentionally designed to keep us trapped in poverty. And so I think, I am a government guy at the moment. So I'm not going to put that at the feet of, 50 years of Black leadership, because I think it matters that Maynard Jackson, started minority participation, right? It matters that because that leads you to having, the largest number of Black businesses per capita than any city in America, right? But I think what happened in that, honestly, is that when you talk to that generation, we sit in an edifice dedicated to Herman James Russell. Like, when you talk to that generation, what happened is that they forgot, couldn't send the elevator back down, right? And so our friend Jay Bailey, who runs this center, always talks about we got to build as we climb. And so I think there was a generation of folks, because candidly, they started out, with a 200 years economic deficit from a business perspective. Like, and so they got access to contracts, they got access to business, they got access to things, and never sent the elevator back down. And you can fault them for that, and some of them need to be held accountable for sure. But you got to also think they were also running a race with a 200-year deficit, right? And so when we think about that, the challenge is incumbent upon all of us now to consistently ask the question, how do we send the elevator back down? Right. And so we have to be conscious and bold and urgent and angry to tear apart, break down the systems that are still in place in far too many places that have, again, created those pockets of wealth and created those pockets of poverty, because that's what you have. Right. And so like you mentioned the chamber. And so Atlanta has, I think the Atlanta way is Atlanta's economic plumbing isn't designed to benefit the least of these anymore, right? And so what has occurred, I think, over time is that, we've gotten a little too friendly with interests that don't serve the least of these. And so that economic plumbing, we got to rearrange it. And in many ways, we got to break it apart and put it back together if we want it to work for the least of these. And so I think for the folks in office, the folks in the community, the folks all around, like the things that created those conditions got to be torn apart. Right. And so we are still very much in a place, it got good to some of us. Right. We got some spots, we got real comfortable. It's like, oh, it's nice up here. You know what I'm saying? We not, we ain't struggling as much as we were. And folks, we had to send the elevator back down. And so now we got to break apart those systems. We got to be honest about them. We got to be honest about the fact that, again, I think the economic plumbing of Atlanta serves folks at the tippy top, whether you're candidly, the color in Atlanta is green, whether you're black or white, Atlanta has a way of conceding towards the almighty dollar. And we've got to, that rips us apart, that particularly if you're a person of color. So we got to be honest about it. And then we got to break down those systems with a degree of anger and urgency.
Yeah. That's that righteous indignation. But I love that analogy of sending the elevator back down. And I'm all for deconstructing and tearing up some stuff. And we figure out how to put it back together. What you got, Aaron?
Yeah, I'll be quick.
That means no. I know my. Go ahead.
I'll be quick. So I think that language means something. Language means things. It is important for us to utilize proper language. Brother Courtney, again, you are doing an amazing job of uplifting some real truth. I work with a mental health organization, and I've worked in this space for a while, and no one asks someone who has experienced sexual trauma to get over it the next day. But we ask Black people to get over 400 years essentially the next day. So if we really want to play with numbers, my father is in his 70s. If we want to talk about slavery being quote unquote over, Jim Crow, my father was young during Jim Crow. I consider Jim Crow slavery. My father lived in slavery. So we have to have a bit of grace and understanding in our conversation when we talk about Black people leading Black people as well. So this is this conversation has a myriad of different things that need to be touched on. And I won't hit on them all, but what I will say is just super important for us to understand how we are utilizing our language to uplift our people. And we have to understand that, yeah, some people are saying, hey, I've made it. I'm at the top. And some of our elders feel like because they were hazed by society, they were hazed by this union, that the struggles that our young people are experiencing aren't valid. I was hazed, so you got to get hazed. We see that in the corporate world. We see that in education. We see that all around. I had to struggle utilizing this encyclopedia. How dare you use this internet? So when we talk about our leadership here in Atlanta, I think that it's just super important that we provide some grace. I don't have to like your policy, but I respect you as a person. And sometimes I don't respect how you move, but I respect you as, and I'm unapologetically Black, I respect you as a Black person. Then we can have another conversation because you are still human to me. We just have to make sure that we're utilizing language correctly so we don't dehumanize and thus, start treating people like animals.
Well, dang, y'all. Okay. Well, there is but no, I agree with all of that. Right? I do. And I pose that question again, not to point fingers, not to lay blame, But it's important to make sure that we're highlighting the facts. But I also feel like there's another layer to this that we have allowed to go kind of under the radar. And I believe this is where the real accountability lies. And that's with community and faith leaders. Because with the grace that we offer to governmental officials and, elected officials, there's only so much they can do. Right? Like your hands get tied sometimes with bureaucracy and red tape and trying to please everybody over here and figure this piece out. But then there are those who don't have those constraints because ain't nobody elect them. They're not responsible to upholding somebody's ideal of them because they're not trying to get reelected in the next term. Our community and faith leaders that I think have gone silent largely. Now we got some very vocal people. I will forever give all the flowers to Gerald Durley. Like there's no wrong that man can do for me. Like he gonna show up and he gonna be loud and bold and say the thing, right? And so we have people who speak up. So again, because folks be coming for me, I'm like, y'all ain't never heard the term generalization. Like it's always gonna be an exception to the rule, okay? But community and faith leaders, I think, are very quiet because everybody feels like that's not my lane. That's not my neighborhood. Somebody else is gonna take care of it, right? I don't want my dollars ruffled. Well, a lot of us ain't got no dollars, right? So ain't nothing to ruffle, right? So nothing to lose. Like speak up, do what it is that you need to do. But while we don't have to lay blame there wholly either, how do we come together as a community? How do community leaders, how do faith-based leaders show up in a way? Because historically, you talk about your father being in his 70s. Look, my daddy, my biological daddy, was born 1926. Okay? 1926. Can you imagine the stories I heard growing up? I'll insert this real quick story because shout out to my other Geechee sister over there, Lavanya. We love telling stories. So here's a story for you real quick. I have this thing called 2x4 power. Okay? And I call it that because we were in Virginia Beach and we were in my daddy's big red, right? That was a Dodge Ram truck. It was red. And we was at this place called AC Moore. It's like the Virginia version of a Home Depot and a Lowe's. My daddy was a carpenter and a contractor by trade. You could just give him your wildest imagination. My daddy's going to sketch it on the paper and build it to scale without an architecture plan in sight. Okay? So we're getting 2x4s. This young white man comes up and he says to my father, "Boy, move your truck." This white man couldn't have been any more than maybe 25, 30 years old. Now I'm about 9 years old. And I'm like, well, that don't sound right. Because now, contrary to what y'all believe, Virginia Beach don't have a lot of us, okay? So I was used to the little microaggressions. I was like, I don't think that's right. And so my daddy didn't say anything. And the person that was with this young white man gets out and he said, "You didn't hear him? Move your truck, boy." And so my daddy says, "KaCey, get in the truck." And so I get in the truck, but we had that little window in the back that kind of looks out into the bed of the truck. And so I'm nosy. So I peeked through the little window, right, and opened it up so I could still hear. Henry has said nothing, but Henry has pulled one of those 2x4s and has cracked that man upside his head. And so I am just beyond myself because I'm thinking my daddy is going to jail. He has hit this young white boy in his head with a 2x4. My father very calmly put the 2x4 back on the bed of the truck, gets in, and we drive home. Now I'm home hollering and screaming because I'm thinking the police about to come knock on the door. And my mother is like, "What is the problem? What is wrong? I sent my child with you one way. Why did she come back this way? Like, what is it?" And he very carefully said, "I did what I needed to do so I didn't have to say what I needed to say." And so for me, while I'm not going to walk around hitting nobody with a 2x4, right? It's in me. Sometimes I have to really check myself because sometimes, I love Jesus and I lay hands, but I can lay hands too. Now you decide which one you want. Okay. So while I'm not going to hit you with a 2x4, I do understand that sometimes you have to shock people. You have to shock their system. And I mentioned that really quickly because one of the things that I loved about my father, which I think is what inspires me to do the work that I do, is because Daddy was Uncle Henry to everybody on that block. To all the young men whose daddies went around in jail, all the young men who fell victim to drug abuse or drug sales, couldn't just seem to get their lives together. He wrapped his arm around them and taught them the trade of carpentry so that they could then make money for themselves and for their families. And a lot of them went on to do some amazing things. And like in all situations, he couldn't save them all either. But my father was a man of God. And he saw that as an extension of loving God by loving these young men who didn't have someone to love them and making sure that they had something that would allow for them to take care of themselves. And so I saw community and I saw what it meant to lead with your faith through the example that my father gave to not just the boys on the block, but even to our own family members. When my father passed in the obituary, he had all of his 9 children listed, his adopted son, so that made 10 of us. But then there was 5 other young men that we could not ignore in acknowledging. That was my Uncle Wendell, my cousin Purnell, my cousin Terrence, it was my cousin Peanut, and it was Cheese, right? Those 5, had my father not been in their lives, who knows where they would have ended up. But he saw it again as an extension of his faith, and he saw it as an extension of being a community member in Beechwood. And when I look, I don't see enough of us, one, leading with our faith or leading as a member of community to ensure that those who are finding their way and fledgling, we're quiet. We're dormant. Now, again, not all our fault either, because, you can't say much to somebody's child anymore. I ignore all that. Let me just put everybody on notice. Your child acting a fool around me, I'm going to say something to her. Me and you can just have a conversation later, okay? Like, that's just what it is. You're not going to, somebody got to get some order, and if it's not you, it's going to be me. But most of us are not going to say anything to other people's children for fear of that mama, that grandmama, that daddy, that auntie coming and asking you why you said something to my child, right? But for those folks, I also see you have no community either, because if you have some community, you would be grateful for somebody saying, I caught what you didn't see. So they don't go out here and do the same thing to somebody else, and then you don't have a child anymore because somebody's not going to ignore it. What do we do? How do we get back to the village? How do we get back to community? And how do we charge our faith leaders? Like, we got to do more than preach and get happy on Sunday mornings, right? Like, we have to go outside the 4 walls. We have to engage in relevant ministries. We talked earlier about relevant education. It's the same thing. And what government officials can't do, community and faith-based leaders should be able to do. But they feel disempowered, disconnected for some reason. But I also believe we have not put the onus back on them to say, how do you preach on Sundays and then ignore our children Monday through Saturday? How do we encourage them? How do we get back to that?
I'm gonna jump in real quick. So my father is